Hello, friends. We don't have a Daron online. Daron Acemoglu, I'm just going to give you a short introduction, apart from the short background that we have just heard. First, Daron Acemoglu is the Nobel Prize winner for 2024. Together with Johnson and Robbins, a year ago, he got the Nobel Prize, the highest prize, but he has become the most famous economist before that. I think that many of you have read his books. His book that is called Why Nation Falls, Why Some Nations Are Rich and Other Nations Are Poor. That's how it was translated in Sber Library. This is one of the most popular books in the world, I think. Narrow Framework, that's another very popular book that was published after that. But we're not going to discuss these views and these insights that already got the Nobel Prize. But sometimes some insights, unexpected insights of the most famous economist in the world. He's in the top 3 according to the formal rankings, but I think that he's the most famous economist, not only the most cited economist, but it is mostly known to the general public. We're going to discuss his unexpected views in terms of what is happening with the economy as it is influenced by the AI. So do we have the connection?
I see. Nice to meet you again, distinguished Professor Acemoglu.
My pleasure. How are you doing?
I hope you remember we had a small 1-hour discussion in 1918 in Astana during Astana Forum due to Kairat Kelimbetov, chief of International Financial Center. Glad to see you again. Дальше, с вашего позволения. Дальше, с вашего позволения, я буду говорить.
I will then switch to Russian, and Daron Acemoglu will speak English. The first question. Professor, in your book, Power and Progress, you state that the development of AI, apart from the fact that it has ramifications of the technical nature, have some negative social ramifications as the inequality will grow. So, if I may, I would like to ask this pretty hardline question. If we witness the uncontrolled development of AI, if it continues, something that is called yet another industrial revolution, will that lead to social tensions and social catastrophes? Please.
I absolutely think that that is a real danger. We already live in a world of inequality, in a world of turbulence across the world, across different regimes, from the United States to China to Russia. Levels of inequality have reached huge levels. And that has geopolitical reasons, institutional reasons, but also technological reasons. In the US case, for example, the explosion in inequality cannot be understood without how we have used new technologies, including digital technologies, for automation. Automation has severed some of the most obvious links between growth of industrial production and markets and demand for workers, which then translates into wage growth and checks inequality. AI promises to be the next step in that. A lot of the energy in AI in the United States and now in China is going after AGI, or artificial general intelligence, where the agenda is very much automating everything you can. And when that happens, there's going to be less need for labor, human work will become less essential, hence creating a pathway to much greater levels of inequality. Plus, we have data that's being more and more centralized, and with power, with data comes power, and that power centralization is also a source of inequality. Throughout history and recently, we have seen, again, across regimes, in Asia, in Russia, in Africa, in Latin America, when you have greater centralization of power, you have more inequality. And we are seeing exactly the same thing in the United States.
Да.
Understood. Thank you, Professor. But I think I would make the question even more hardline. For 200 years, as Charles Babbage forecasted, that people will be driven out of the workforce and there will be a social catastrophe. Do you reiterate, do you support this forecast that a social catastrophe will happen?
Well, actually, it was also a very famous Russian economist, Vasily Leontiev, who warned about this in the 1960s. And he said, you know, everybody thought horses were critical and the economy couldn't function without horses, and see where they are now. What guarantees do we have that labor will not go the way of the horses? Now, indeed, there is no guarantee, but what I emphasize is that that's a choice. There are so many different things you can do with AI. AI is a very versatile technological platform. You can use it in a way that actually boosts human creativity. You can use it to create new services and new goods for a changing economy with greater geopolitical risks, aging populations, climate risk. Or you can double down on the automation agenda. If we double down on the automation agenda, yes, indeed, we could go towards a horse-like future. Now, it won't be immediate. I don't think we're going to see mass unemployment in the United States in the next 5 years. We're not going to see labor being eliminated in most of the economy in 10 years, but we could go in that direction with really faithful consequences.
Thank you. Now, maybe your more optimistic forecast. In your books, you are saying that apart from automating mundane tasks, AI can work differently. AI can complement people. They can add value to the human activities. How will it look like?
Absolutely. I think that is the most important message I want to leave people with, that for entrepreneurs as well as for lay people, that the future of AI is not written yet. It is to be written. And we can decide a very different future. And that future could have the human complementary AI, or what I sometimes call pro-worker AI. Let me give you an example to bolster the case. We can use AI, perhaps one day integrated with robotics, so that we have super robots that do all of the electrical tasks that we have. So deal with power outages, maintain electrical equipment, install them, troubleshoot them, deal with the electricity grid. That future is not going to be anytime soon, and it won't be that easy. But there is another future, which is actually within grasp, because the technologies for doing it are not that difficult at all, which is that we try to augment and make better existing electricians. AI as a training tool, but much more importantly, AI developed on the best knowledge on electrical engineering, on electrical machinery and use cases that have been developed by the expert electricians, so that in real time, even novice electricians can get immediate help to deal with more sophisticated and more complex tasks. And that's the kind of future that's feasible for blue-collar workers, for office workers, for managers, for educators, for nurses, for doctors. And those are the kinds of tools that we're not developing. Why are we not developing them? First of all, because it requires a different industry structure. It requires less focus on AGI. It requires more domain-specific data. So there are several elements for it, but this is where creative entrepreneurship should really come in.
Thank you. Let me ask you another question, dear Professor. Professor to professor question. the natural intelligence, should it change in order for AI to be complementary to it so that artificial intelligence would not squeeze out natural intelligence but would cooperate?
100%. But there are two layers to this question. The first one is that, as the grandfather of the internet, J.C.R. Licklider, wrote in 1960, full 65 years ago from now, the possibility that human brains and information machines become coupled is the real promise. So that's the first important observation, that we as humans have tremendous skills, tremendous versatility, but lots of limitations too, both in information processing and bringing different bits of information together in real time. That's where the right informational tools can be very useful. But at the same time, to work with computers, we need to build new skills. We need to understand AI. The AI needs to become more transparent, more legible to us. But we also need to be at the forefront of being conversant in those skills. It's a two-way street. It's not just on humans. It's both on the development AI on the humans. But it's a very important thing because there's all this mounting evidence from the US where you have all these AI models, for example, in radiology. When you look at them in controlled circumstances, they perform extremely well. And then you give them to radiologists or doctors, and actually they start performing worse than they did before the tool, with the tool, without the tool. Why? Because there isn't that congruence between the tool and the human worker. That's not a recipe for success. So we need to bring that congruence to the forefront.
Which new skills, in your view, are very important to make sure that we are complementary to AI?
Well, first of all, flexibility. Education systems throughout the world have never focused on flexibility. We have a very old style education system from, Russia to China to the United States to Europe, where, we teach people the sort of the basic knowledge within certain fields. But in a more turbulent world, where turbulence is caused by both by factors outside of AI and by AI, this flexibility is going to be key. People will have to change their tasks, they will have to adapt to new situations. Second, everybody needs to understand AI. Unless you understand AI, you're not going to we're not going to be able to process AI input correctly. So some people right now eulogize AI. They think AI is the solution to everything. Others cannot understand what AI is doing. So we need this sort of skill of knowing both the capabilities, limits, and limitations of AI. But most importantly, the AI needs to be developed in a way that actually facilitates that.
Thank you. If I may, I would add the skill of critical thinking here, because artificial intelligence, as we know, can hallucinate. And we know of different cases. For instance, in 2023, large corporations would lay off a lot of people, but in 2025, they would hire them back. Because AI turns out to make mistakes. It hallucinates. And I think that we must know, we must feel when we can trust AI and when we cannot trust AI. If I may, I would like to ask my next question about the statement that you made that raises a lot of surprise and controversy in the world of science. You demonstrated with the help of your models that AI is actually not improving productivity. In 10 years, expected growth in productivity is 0.96% or 1.015. This is astonishing, an astonishing conclusion. In your view, why AI is not improving productivity or increasing productivity so low?
Well, so there are two parts to this. And I wouldn't say I have demonstrated it. It's more like an analysis and a forecast. But the first part to it is that at the moment, if you look at the recent past, we don't see much of a boost from AI or other tools of the digital economy on aggregate productivity, both in Europe and the United States. And that could be just because they are still spreading. They're not really an integral part of the economy. And then the second part of the analysis, which is the one that you're mentioning, is really about forecasting what would happen in the future, which comes with a huge amount of uncertainty because we don't know what the capabilities of AI are going to be. We don't know where the direction of AI is going to be. We don't know how organizations are going to react to it. But I wrote that in reaction to a number of reports that were coming from the US, Europe, China, that were just over-optimistic about what AI is going to do, how it's going to revolutionize the economy. So I used some very simple economics to show that, there are limits to how much productivity gains you can get unless AI becomes really, really expert very quickly, which again, we cannot rule it out because there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think it's the unlikely scenario.
But maybe like with any new technology, maybe at the start there is a phase of high costs and low productivity, and then at a later stage it will really take off and fly, and productivity will grow tremendously.
100%, that's a possibility. And in fact, if you look at AI right now, there are really two tracks. It's a two-track process. We have the foundation models, which, like GPT, which are advancing very rapidly. The amount of data that is being housed by these models, the amount of compute power that they're using, if you do some basic comparisons, today's AI models are trained about 1 billion times more power than it took the Apollo control system to send humans to the moon. So that's the kind of power concentration we're using here. But applications on that foundation layer, which is what would make usable technologies for businesses or for people, except for chatbots, are not advancing very fast. But once they do, you're absolutely right. Perhaps we can get much better productivity performance from radiology, from coding, from accounting tasks, but it's been very slow. And there's a good reason for that. That's where you need the high quality data. That's where you need the reliability. You mentioned the lack of hallucinations. That's where you need an understanding of the tasks that humans perform. And that's where you need integration with humans, because it's easy to automate certain tasks in a lab. But if you look at the jobs that humans do in the real world, it's always a combination of many things, and you can't automate all of them with the current technology.
Once again, thank you very much. And now let's switch to another topic: startups and corporations. In your interviews, Professor, you have numerously mentioned that corporations consume startups. They cannibalize them, and for the reasons of competition. And this way, they slow down innovation. On the other hand, we know cases of synergy between startups and large corporations. My question is the following: on which terms do you believe there could be a successful synergy between startups and large corporations? Because for Russia, it's very relevant. We have a very high demand for technological innovation, and we're hoping for startups. And we have very strong frontier corporations. So how shall we build not theoretical but practical relations? You're welcome.
Look, I think we have to take a step back to think about this, because I actually would like to underscore both the severity of the problem and the hope for startups, which I think is relevant for many people in your audience who are potential entrepreneurs or actual entrepreneurs. If you look at Silicon Valley in the United States, in its early days and as it matured, it created a marketplace, an environment, which was probably one of the most innovative ones in human history. There was a hub of energy, risk-taking, entrepreneurship, the sort of blending of finance and product development to allow scaling up of the new technologies. And out of that came an enormous concentration of knowledge and enormous possibilities for creating new products. But we are also seeing in Silicon Valley, or the tech sector in general, today, the dominance of the largest corporations humanity has seen. And these corporations, while some of them still maintain their innovativity, are also hugely dominant. And what they do is they reduce the space for startups so much that either startups have to cater to their needs, because if they do something different, they're going to be crushed. So they much rather develop a product that they can sell to Google or Microsoft or Facebook. Or what happens is that they have so much money that they get all of the innovative resources, all the best researchers, all the best engineers go to these corporations. So what that does is that it really undermines competition. Competition backed up by the right institutions, inclusive institutions, what I've called with James Robinson in Why Nations Fail, is the key for innovation, and we need more innovation. But Silicon Valley, paradoxically, which was a hub of innovation, has now become a barrier against innovation because of the dominance of these corporations. So what needs to be done is we need more independent startups that can pursue their own lines without being crushed. They need to come from Europe, they need to come from other parts of the world, but they ultimately need to be able to compete on a level playing field without just catering to the needs of these large corporations.
May I translate a little bit the answer of Professor to the audience? I mean, institutional development and inclusive and extra active institutions. Thanks to them, our professor got his Nobel Prize. So the answer is the following. Institutions must create inclusive access to resources and opportunity. Only then we will have positive cooperation between corporations and startups. Do I get you right, Daron?
100%. And institutions both matter at that foundational layer, the court system, democracy, secure property rights, checks on the power of powerful politicians, powerful business people, but it also matters at the next layer, which is competition policy. So in the United States, for example, there was a robust antitrust agenda for decades, and that has become much weaker, for example.
Да.
Yes. Let me remind you that we had a discussion in Astana, and it related exactly to what else is important, how culture is important. And I really thank you for stating your point of view in a narrow framework, and your state of view was more comprehensive and holistic on this point about how open institutions, inclusive institutions could be built and established. Now, if I may, let's talk about regulation. You're saying that the market cannot regulate AI development by itself. Then what should policymakers do?
Well, the market is the best tool that we as humans have invented for innovation. But there is no guarantee that the market dynamics are always going to get us to exactly where we want. That's why a regulatory framework is very important. But light touch regulation, that's the principle that most countries in the industrialized world have adopted, and I think it's worked reasonably well. But there is a difference between a market and a few companies. When I think people refer to market getting things right, and again, as I said, that doesn't always happen, but there is some tendency, that's through the competitive process. So the startups that you were mentioning earlier on, if they can pursue their own agenda, that makes it more likely that there's competition between different viewpoints, between different visions, between different technologies, and that could get us to the right place. But if the market is just one or two companies, then we're just getting the business models and the ideas of these two companies, and the likelihood that we end up in the right place is going to be weaker. So that's why competition policy is a very important part of it. But I also have argued that, you know, our approach to AI regulation has been too much on reactive mode, meaning something happens, some risks, some new developments, and then the governments react with, you know, privacy laws or with digital acts, etc. We need more proactive regulations, meaning understand where AI could go, and the government steering a little bit by providing incentives and guardrails about, you know, the more socially beneficial developments of it. And that's why this links to our earlier, the first question about the direction of AI, where you can actually make people more productive, the pro-worker direction, is really where we need more support and more enthusiasm for.
I absolutely agree that we'd rather have a proactive policy towards AI, but you mentioned at the start of our conversation yourself that the future is unknown. We don't know how AI will evolve. It's better to be healthy and rich rather than poor and weak. But so far, it's not clear how to achieve this state. May I ask my final question?
Yes, it's not that easy.
Yes, correct. My final question, and quite specific one. If we were to think how to implement an ecosystem of cooperation between startups and corporations, you have already said the one recipe, competitive policy, the policy that pursues competition, protection of competition. Then could you recommend or could you advise what decisions should policymakers make? And decision makers, what decisions should be made so that the system of cooperation between startups and corporations would develop?
Well, look, I think cooperation between startups and existing platforms is a two-edged sword. You don't want too much of it, you don't want too little of it. Too much of it means that startups will not bring new energy because they will just cater to what the large corporations, which are already very powerful, really want. If you don't have any coordination, then startups cannot use the tools and the business tools and technologies of the large corporations as input into their own agenda. So you need a balance. I think all of this needs to be undergirded by the right kind of institutions. I think in the age of AI, democracy has become more important, not less. We need more democratic governance of AI. We need more checks and balances. We need more civil society involvement. And we also need a new system of, for example, data regulation. So some of the things that I've talked about before, for instance, developing these sort of pro-worker electrical tools, all of that requires domain-specific data, meaning high-quality data that's about what you're doing. It's about the financial system, it's about the healthcare system, it's about the electrical thing. So we need some sort of legal framework where people have ownership over data. They can protect their data against the government because, surveillance powers of the governments are increasing everywhere. And that's really crushing dissent, it's really crushing civil society. You need the privacy of individuals to be protected, but at the same time, you need individuals to be able to invest in producing high quality data and sell that data. So we need a very different legal framework when it comes to data, which is going to be the lifeblood of the future of the economy.
Абсолютно согласен с вами.
I absolutely agree with your last statement, Daron. I believe we are in a state that was described in a fairy tale. Shadows of Hans Christian Andersen. A human may lose the shadow and then shadow will start controlling and manipulating this human. So the human must know the miraculous formula or equation. The shadows must know where they belong. Human rights and rights for personal data and stimulation of the turnover of this data must be there, and we must create such a situation when human is in control of his shadow instead of shadow controlling the human. I believe, I hope that I got you right in this. I wanted to extend a great thank you.
And in fact, this is the agenda that I've been pushing. My next book is about liberal democracy and liberalism, precisely because those ideas about human rights and individual rights have to be the basis of this new world in which we are going to create new institutions and new technologies for.
Это ваша позиция известна.
We know of this point of view of yours, just like where the China is going. I hope we will continue this discussion in the future. I extend a great thank you to you, Daron, for this meeting with me and for this meeting with this large audience, and they were listening to you very excitedly. Thank you very much.
Helpful, useful.
So much.
Thank you. Thank you.